To commemorate Seven's conclusion and Go Rush's debut, I'm doing something I wanted to do for a long time now and rank all of the different Yu-Gi-Oh! Series we've gotten so far, in my personal opinion. As of writing, 90 is the latest episode of 7, so I'll be judging it off of those. But unless the finale manages to compress all of Arc 5's dumpster fire of a conclusion into 20 minutes, I doubt its placement will change. There are 7 shows to go through, and I've split 3 of them up based on different tones or development changes to make things more complicated for everyone. Even more so after I tell you that I'm undecided on most of these. Let's start. In 10th place, Most of Reigns. Anyone even vaguely familiar with the anime likely knows that Reigns' development was yet another dumpster fire, and probably why Sevens was given to another studio. Season 1 alone somehow had 4 recap episodes. 4! With the exception of Ai and some of the other AIs, the cast is easily the dullest in the franchise, with Yusaku having an incredibly bare-bones character arc in Season 1 and nothing at all in Season 2. Seriously, you could pluck him out of Season 1's ending and drop him into the start of Season 3 and nothing would change. The other characters aren't that good either. Takeru is GX's Jesse all over again, but manages to drain even more screen time from the other secondary characters. Aoi was built up to have an I help you, you help me relationship with Yusaku, but she continually vanishes off the face of the earth whenever people need to do anything important. And Go somehow spends all of his time with kids, yet doesn't understand how they think. His debut episode has him angry that they're interested in Yusaku's online persona and throws a tantrum, only realizing after humiliating himself that the kids still prefer him. In other words, they were temporarily distracted by the shiny new thing and went back to their actual favorite afterwards. That's not even a kid thing. Everyone is susceptible to that. How did he not understand that? And to make matters worse, this 2-parter arc is turned into his entire motivation in Season 2, complete with him starving himself to continue training, having an AI implanted in his head, and straight up killing an AI and becoming an antagonist, all because the kids were having another Playmaker phase. What is wrong with this man-child? So, yeah, that's one of the things I've been meaning to get off my chest for the past few years. Moving on to 9th place is Zexal 1, or Zeal 1. While the tone stays the same in Zeal 2, this is the only time Konami officially rebranded the series partway through, so I'm splitting it up as well. Zeal 1 is just forgettable. It was essentially a sci-fi version of the original, complete with a jerker with a heart of gold antagonist with a useless brother, and a rival with a hospitalized sister. But Yuma was a terrible protagonist to begin with. He got much better with time, but yeah, Zeal 1 didn't really have much going for it. Also, it had Kotori, aka the worst female character in the franchise by a country mile. In 8th place, we have 5D's Season 2. There was no rebranding here, but there was a significant shift in the status quo and tone, with a change of director and a shift to harder sci-fi, compared to the mix of sci-fi and fantastical elements before. So I'm counting it as a split. Anyway, Season 2 marked a particularly aggressive period in Konami's marketing, with duels essentially being just card adverts, particularly for Yusei, who used a brand new deck with each duel, with the only constant being Junk Synchron and his inability to do anything without shooting Star Dragon. For example, Draco Ikis is treated as a huge deal, and the staff even said it was inspired by Yugi and Jaden, and yet he never shows up after its debut? What? And while Season 2 added some cool new things, it also assassinated Akisa's character and turned her into a bench warmer. One of the endings literally calls her that, and also botches the lore to give more importance to Crow without reconciling the plot holes it creates, namely the addition of a 6th dragon to the so-called 5 dragons, without explaining where it came from or how it replaced the dragon we were all expecting to see. Going back to Yusei, he dove deep into Mary Sue territory here too, particularly due to the aforementioned deck replacement, but also with scenarios where he won duels, even when the story would have worked just fine even if he'd lost, because we need an invincible hero, I suppose. I know most protagonists are invincible, but it never felt as forced as it was with this one. Also, Zone being an obsessed fanboy turned cosplayer was a huge cop-out after half a season of hinting at him being Yusei himself. Next is GX. Honestly, this is the midpoint of the franchise for me in terms of quality. There's specifically nothing inherently wrong with GX like the previous shows. There's a case to be made for it focusing on new characters to the detriment of old ones, and it started the trend of female characters starting off in a strong way and falling off almost at once. But it was nice seeing the world immediately after the original, and Jaden was a decent lead, particularly in Season 4, which deconstructed his happy-go-lucky character and gave him PTSD. It had dumb moments and good moments, and they balanced each other out, is what I'm saying. In 6th place is Zeal 2. This was much longer than Zeal 1, much like 5D's Season 2, but this is likely the second most underrated entry on this list. Zexal 2 had a much better plot and possibly the best villain in the franchise, and even now I'm still amazed at how many little details were woven together to form a much deeper narrative than the original, though of course it also has its problems. Like Alexis, Rio was introduced as potentially being an interesting female lead but fell off at once, and just followed her brother along everywhere. And while Zeal 2 closed some of the original's plot holes, it also created new ones, the biggest one being that Shark getting possessed by numbers in Season 1 makes no sense after revelations about him in the second. The dual writing was also ridiculous, but this is a case where the drama of the main story kind of made up for it. But of course, Tori made everything worse with her mere presence as someone who existed only to be kidnapped or yell Yuma's name over and over, because the Japanese VA got a contract saying she was required to be in every episode. She doesn't even contribute to anything. This is because the creator has admitted he hates writing women, but that just makes it worse. At least her VA is an amazing duelist by all accounts. In 5th place is Vrain Season 3. Development issues, as I mentioned earlier, meant that this season was only a fraction of the length of the others, but that just meant the writers had to focus up their narrative and it worked great. While it requires a slight leap in logic that isn't entirely explained by the story, though this could just be another personal thing, turning Ai into the villain was an inspired choice and he was a compelling one at that, while still being charming in his own way. Robot P, likewise, was a lot more interesting than I thought he'd be, and while Aoi somehow manages to be even more useless here than she was before, again she drops off the face of the earth despite being one of the few survivors of Ai's rampage at the start of the season, coming back in the finale just to say, I didn't do anything. Well, I'll do that to you. Yusaku, on the other hand, is much better written. In fact, he gets more development in episode 2 of season 3 than he does in all of season 2. Can you believe that? That's another thing I've been wanting to say for years. And while I really like how the series ended, yeah, it's for the best that Reigns was killed off before it could get worse again. As an aside, while people have rightfully hated 4K Media / 4Kids for adding jokes to Yu-Gi-Oh! In the past, their jokes are a much needed addition to Reigns' monotony, so I recommend giving the double try for Reigns at the very least. In 4th place is Arc 5. Arc 5 is arguably where Reigns' problem started according to some information about how it was developed. In terms of the anime itself, it had a ton of great ideas and did its job as an anniversary series well, bringing back old summoning methods and tons of references in the early episodes, and even bringing back some older characters in later seasons, though Alexis was again useless to no one's surprise. Season 1 was near perfect, with only 2 early duels dragging the pacing down, with the synchro arc of Season 2 being a mixed bag in the community that also marked Yuzu's transition from arguably more important than Yuya to living plot device. I still remember the exact moment I realized this had happened, when the villain of the arc, a random French guy in charge of the synchro dimension, randomly grabbed her to kidnap her and she did nothing to fight back, and this feeling was only cemented when we later see him dueling with a VI headset on, and somehow she still doesn't try to escape. The rest of the season was rushed, and while I liked the climactic duel, silly as it was, the last 10 or so episodes were dreadful. It was as if the writing team had been swapped out for the one who wrote The Last of Us Part 2, as the final arc just repeatedly bashed you over the head with the moral the writers wanted you to learn, without any sense of subtlety. Side note, it's funny that the 2 series directed by Ono both focused heavily on sentient dragons, so I guess we know what he's into. In 3rd place is easily the most underrated series in the franchise, Sevens. I almost pity everyone who refused to watch it because of its art style, because Sevens is genuinely fun. The story is definitely simpler, yes, but that gives the show more room to explore its cast, and explore it does. Where most shows quickly excise all but the main protagonist and his best friend, the secondary cast of Sevens stays relevant up until the end, with even tertiary characters getting solo or ensemble focus episodes from time to time. Even Roman, who I assumed would be another Alexis and get one good episode before disappearing, remains relevant with her own in-depth growth over the series, and she arguably has a deeper character growth than even Yuga, who is a fun lead who reminds me the most of Yugi as someone who wins duels through strategy, not by summoning a new ace monster each duel, though he does do that sometimes, to be fair. And speaking of, he doesn't always win either. While you can be sure he'll win important duels, the others are really anyone's game. If it makes more sense for his opponent to win, even if Yuga summoned a brand new monster or performed an amazing combo, he'll likely still lose. He's definitely a breath of fresh air, which is helped by him being genuinely enjoyable as a character. I really only have 3 issues with Sevens. 1. The one-off duels can be pretty formulaic. The protagonist sets out their field, the opponent summons their ace monster, and puts the protagonist in a pinch. The protagonist summons their ace monster. This gets better as time goes on, but it's definitely noticeable in the early episodes. 2. Otis. Otis is one of the few positive adult characters and is treated as a mysterious person with all the answers, and yet he loses all of his duels. All of them. You could argue that some of them he loses on purpose because he's testing the heroes, and that is valid, but all of them? How are you supposed to take him seriously if he has a 0% win rate? 3. Luke. Luke is by far the worst part of Sevens. He is insufferable, he is loud and obnoxious, with an ego that puts abridged Kybus to shame. He is the only character to not receive any character development at all, despite everyone else getting some growth over the course of 90-odd episodes. He does a grand total of one thing of value near the end, off-screen at that, and that's it. And not only does he only ever think of himself and make everything around him worse, he's the biggest Miri Sue since Yusei, with a deck that makes no sense except to give him last-second wins he doesn't deserve, and he never has to face the consequences of his actions. He's the only one with a perfect win record, which goes straight to his ego, and despite all of the issues he causes, he's consistently being rewarded for everything. Even out of universe, the Sevens manga is about him instead of serving as an alternate story using Sevens' premise. It's all about him. It's just an ego trip, and I hate it. So yeah, that's the third thing I really wanted to say. This is therapeutic. In second place is the original series / Duel Monsters. Part of this could be nostalgia, but despite all the cheesy friendship speeches and Taya and Tristan being utterly useless, the original story is a great one with great lovable characters and an incredible mythos, with even the filler arcs having great moments that are remembered fondly. There's not much I can say here. If you know about Yu-Gi-Oh, you know about Duel Monsters. Also, a shout out to the Dubcast, who clearly adore what they do. The anime ended in 2006, and they still show up to events and live streams, interact with fans, and were just as hyped as us when Dark Side of Dimensions was announced, even before they were hired to dub it. Also, to nip this in the bud, both the anime and the manga have different strengths. Blasphemous as this may be to say, I'm actually happy that the anime skipped Duelist Kingdom, as the first arc of the manga was just Sociopath of the Week wrongs Yugi and his friends, Yami enacts karmic retribution, over and over for 5 volumes. Honestly, the Shadow RPG was the only worthwhile thing that was lost for me, and I actually think it's better that for the story that Death T was cut too, which was a death game Kaiba trapped Yugi and the others in. Its absence makes it much more believable that Yugi would eventually befriend him, since, even taking the Mind Crush into account, Kaiba did some terrible things, and that's the last thing I had to say lest my head exploded. But it'd also be cool if Kazuki Takahashi eventually wrote out his original plan for the final arc, since he had to cut it short due to his sickness at the time of writing it and looming deadlines. And finally, in first place, 5D Season 1. I heard once that it was intended to be all that 5Ds was, and while it still leaves some unanswered questions by the end, I can believe that. As a standalone story, it's great. It's a much grungier world than the previous 2 series with an older cast. There's a lot more drama, and the signer aspect adds an interesting mystery on top of the class disputes. In fact, all of the signers have their time to shine, and turbo duels are fun to watch, and I'm still amazed that we haven't gotten them in the physical game yet. Not even something similar to the Duel Links version. And when I said all the signers had their moment, I mean it. While the final duel was a sausage fest as always, both Akiza and Luna had their own satisfying arcs that wrapped up elements from their backstories, Akiza and her psychic powers and Luna's connection to the spirit world. It isn't perfect, of course, due to issues with the cult aspect and one of the VAs being called in a real cult. Part of the story had to be changed, and we never got the full story of Demark and Ancient Fairy Dragon, but all in all, 5D Season 1 was simply excellent. Bonus, the Heart Dragon mark was always meant to be a thing, even showing up in the 2009 DS game, and Leo was always meant to be a signer too. I don't know to what extent the Crow ruined everything rumors are true, but that's interesting to think about, isn't it? Thanks for getting to the end of this video. What did you think? Do you want to crucify me for not putting DM first, or for saying both the anime and the manga had their merits? Let me know in the comments, and please like and subscribe to help the channel grow. Thank you all again, and as always, have a great day.